Hello, this is how are you today? I'm going to make a video concerning a question regarding Charles Darwin, and just say the substance is if Charles Darwin were around today, he would revise his work, Origin of Species, and it would say DNA is the origin of species. DNA is the origin of species. Because when you're looking at how do living organisms come into existence, it's based on DNA, right? That's observable science. And so Charles Darwin was keen on observation. So in his day, over 150 years ago, they couldn't observe what was taking place on a cellular level. But now they can in this day and age. So since he was so heavy into observation, he would be able to see what's taking place inside a human cell, and he'd see that DNA is the origin of living things. And so I just thought I would go over a little bit what takes place on a cellular level, and to show that human beings and other living organisms are built, basically atom by atom. It's like a building block. I know that, quantum physicists, go into subatomic particles and all of that, but on a cellular level, it's building with atoms. And, the cell is not converting energy into matter like fusion or anything like that. It's taking the basic parts of matter, like what's on a periodical chart, taking those atoms and forming them into molecules. And so that's how a human being, for instance, in a human being, you start off with one cell, and you end up with 100 trillion, basically, and 200 different types. And so how does that, how does that functionality take place? Well, again, atoms come together, bond together, and form molecules. You get enough molecules, you got a human being. You get enough cells, you got a human being. But you start off with one. So what takes place? Well, the DNA, they call it DNA, is a very complex molecule. It's extensively big. And what takes place is another molecule. Remember, molecule is atoms bound together in multiples. Well, this one molecule, it's called, the acronym is RNA, goes to the nucleus of a cell where the DNA is located. What is it called? It's hard to say. But anyway, the DNA, which is in the nucleus, it goes to a particular part of the DNA, whatever is needed. Say, let's give you an example of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is in red blood cells, and it's oxygen carrying. And it is a very complex molecule, say 10,000 atoms, but only 4 of those atoms are iron. And the reason that there are only 4 iron atoms is because iron is ionized, and it will attach to oxygen. So it's an oxygen-carrying molecule, and why it's so complex is it protects the iron from water. Because if the water were able to come in contact with the iron molecules, it would create a rust crystal. So it encapsulates it, and so that's just one example. There are hundreds of thousands of these segments in DNA that are constructs for the human being. So in the case of hemoglobin, the little RNA goes to the DNA, and it goes to a particular part of it because it has to choose what particular part, right? Or it goes to the exact location, and then it records the sequence in that strip of DNA and carries it to a ribosome. A ribosome is another molecule. Remember what a molecule is? It's atoms bound together. Well, these parts, this molecule is the builder. And so it takes that code or that segment or that pattern that's in the DNA, and then it uses that to build the molecule. In this case, it would be hemoglobin. So that's basically how the functionality of the human cell works. You've got DNA, gives all the patterns to build hundreds of thousands of molecules, and then the RNA is able to pick out what segment is needed for one particular functionality of the cell is needed in the total human being. So if you look at that and you look at that functionality, you see that there had to be in DNA first, but then there also had to be that component in the cell that takes that coded part and then converts it into molecules, or the building blocks of a human being. So it's a little human being building machine. You know, start off with one cell and you end up with a human being. So Charles Darwin was looking for the origin of species. He would find it in DNA. So if you look at that just by itself, you would see that that is very complex. So how could random forces create a very complex molecule that had all the needed codes to build all the needed molecules that make up the physical being? You see, it's like all the instructions on how to build a human being, and how could that come about by chance? That's not logical. The logic, and then when you think about logic too, you're saying what's observable. You know, is it observable that something comes together by chance and has very specific and functionality? You know, how could an example, I guess, would be like building a home, right? You have a blueprint. So what are the chances a blueprint would just come into existence by itself? You know, like a pencil would just fall on a piece of paper and start scratching on it because the ground was shaking. And oh, look, lo and behold, it's the design of a two-story house with a kitchen and bathroom and all this. See, that's not observable. That's not the way things work. When you think about, that's when you think about logic. You think about things that are observable, that you see before, you've seen before. So atoms just randomly linking together and then interacting. You've got this, and of course we're explaining it very basically, this three-step process. You have the DNA that forms, and then you have the molecule that goes to a specific part of it, gets the needed code, that carries it over to another molecule, and that molecule builds a complex protein, which is the matter of human being, and we're made out of atoms. Interesting, the Bible says made from the dust of the earth. Some people say, well, I don't like to mix science and religion. Well, what we're trying to do is understand where we came from, and that's kind of like reality. That is reality. And if you want to just only focus on certain aspects of life and ignore others, then how are you really going to get the real picture of where things came from and how they function and all that? And another thing is that there's a huge difference if you look at life and you say it was all designed. It gives you a whole different perspective on things. You start looking for patterns. You start looking for how things interact. And just as a side note, and if you start looking at things and say things could happen randomly without any sort of direction, that's a whole different sort of thought process. Totally different. And so evolution in a way is causing people to adhere to a certain type of thought process that's kind of closed without looking at the evidence, because the evidence is not demonstrating that everything came about by chance. It's too orderly. There's too many multiple steps, because when you think about it, just look at, the more you look at the human organism and how it starts from one cell and develops into a human being, that's a multi-step process. And you don't observe multi-step processes just coming into being on their own. That's not observable. So if you want to, I encourage you to look into cellular biology, DNA, cell functionality, and you'll be quite amazed, and you'll see that. And again, I go back to, I guess, the main theme that was, if Charles Darwin were here in our day, he would realize that DNA is the origin of species. That is basically the parameters for who we are. And well, I guess I allow you to use your own mind to reason on it and think about it. And I just wanted to get that out there. A lot of people are very strong and adamant about evolution, but evolution does not match up with observable science. At the time that Charles Darwin wrote the book, he was observing things the best he could, but now they're able to look at atomic particles, atoms and cellular activity, and that's a whole different perspective. And so he would have known how things come into existence now. And since he was keen on observation, and with all respect to him, he would have come to the conclusion that cellular biology is showing us that there's a pattern, a design, and a sequence that cannot have happened by chance. So, thank you for your attention on that. Have a good day.